Well, now we'll be having a great panel on diversity and sustainability in our supply chains. And we've got an amazing panel today. I'll be moderating. My name is Andrea Little-Lombago. I am the Vice President of Research and Analysis at Interos. And I'd like to go around first and have our panelists provide a quick overview of their background, and then we'll get into some of the questions. So perhaps, Sherry, would you like to start?
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Sherry Heinisch. I currently am the Global Offering Leader for Sustainable Supply Chain Finance and Circularity, and I am a DEI champion under my Supply Chain Queen brand, and it's a pleasure to be here this morning. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. Miriam.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Miriam Saad. I work at a company called TELUS, which for those of you that don't know is a top Canadian telecom company. My role at TELUS, I'm Director of Procurement for IT and technology services, but I'm very passionate about supplier diversity, D&I, and sustainability. So I'm really happy to be here today.
Great, thanks so much. And Javette.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Javette Hines, and I'm with Citi. I've been with Citi for 13 years, and I manage our supply chain development, inclusion, and sustainability program, and been in the supply chain for 20 plus years. Happy to be here.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much. And we have a wealth of experience on this panel, so I'm excited to dive right into the questions. And so, Javette, I'll stick with you for the beginning. For you, throughout your career, and then especially in your current position, how do you approach supplier diversity? Are there certain frameworks that you think about? Are there certain kinds of requirements or standards that you look at? What's sort of the thinking that you have and framing when you think about supplier diversity programs?
Sure, Andrea, thank you so much for that question. For me, supplier diversity really is at the heart of when you're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion. You're also talking about economic impact when it comes to supplier diversity. And so the key, metrics that we look at certainly are what are the actual opportunities that are available in the procurement area and supply chain space that are available for diverse suppliers. And it runs the gamut, because when you look at diverse suppliers, in terms of the range of expertise and opportunity, it could be the smallest of suppliers, but diverse suppliers are also very large. They're billion-dollar suppliers. So for us, it's a matter of who are the suppliers? What are the opportunities that they can provide the best in terms of service to Citi? What are the products that are available to Citi? And then certainly as it relates to all the other general requirements, who can deliver the best and most efficient service to us? The other piece of it from a supplier diversity perspective is that when it comes to metrics, yes, we look at metrics in terms of how much spend are we actually, accountable for and doing with diverse suppliers? And then at the same time, how is it that we're taking the opportunity to build capacity for smaller scale suppliers? And we do a lot of that by working with a number of different third-party organizations, whether it's Minority Supplier Development Council UK, National Minority Supplier Development Council, Women's Business Enterprise, National Gay Lesbian Chamber of Commerce. All those organizations help with the capacity building, as well as providing diverse suppliers into the network, and then making sure that sustainability is also a part of the overall framework of what we look at, because it's important to us. We want to make sure diverse suppliers are also engaged and aware of sustainability as well.
Great, thank you. And do you feel that, is there more of an emphasis on this right now, do you find, or how have you found it changing over the last few years?
Yeah, absolutely. I think certainly post George Floyd's murder, there has been an increased interest in supplier diversity, and that's a plus, because I do believe that unfortunately supplier diversity is often not as advanced in terms of the discussion as workforce diversity. But yet again, it's the place where you build economic impact. So certainly while many of us as large firms have had programs in place and looking at what we spend, how we spend, and tracking that spend, I think the post-George Floyd situation, the civic and social unrest in the United States especially, put some additional emphasis on what we should be doing with respect to diverse suppliers, how we need to make sure there are metrics and goals in place, not simply to track spend, but to ensure that there's a seat at the table to include diverse suppliers as a part of our supply chain mix within a corporation, and certainly more integration with respect to lines of business within all firms.
Great, thank you. And perhaps Sherry or Miriam, are you also finding basically a transition going on right now in the corporate world with supplier diversity moving from sort of a nice to have to more of a corporate initiative and corporate priority. Do you see a shift moving along in those areas? Perhaps, Sherry, are you seeing any changes as well over the last few years?
Absolutely. I think, as Javette mentioned, it is a priority. I think that folks are being scrutinized through the lens of social inclusion and also financial inclusion. So I can share, when you start to look specifically in agriculture and CPG, how do you create equity for all and empowering smallholders specifically? So just look at coffee. You have over 25 million coffee producers, often from marginalized communities, lots of women who you can use, something like sustainability or sustainable procurement practices to actually empower them through microfinancing, through subsidies. And all of this can be enabled through some really cool convergence of tech, like blockchain, for example, and sophisticated AI. But I think for me, when most folks say, yes, we want to be more inclusive, that first next step is often unclear. And then also, it's not just about including people and giving them access. There's an element of development, which I think we also need to talk about, because given the uptick in ESG reporting, what often happens is, you push all of these new metrics in non-financial performance on these small or medium suppliers, and they don't know where to start. So it's how can you take them along with you on your journey and empower them in a way that I don't know that we totally have that figured out yet, but maybe we'll unpack it on this panel.
Absolutely, thank you. And I think we'll dive into some of that as the discussion evolves. Miriam, how does diversity, equity, inclusion fold into your supplier selection?
Yeah, I mean, it is a really good question, and it is a really important one, because I think it's important that we provide, access or equal access to our supply, management opportunity that are truly reflective of our diverse communities, and also, encourage economic development. So when you look at, diverse suppliers, I think it's important that we account for that in our spend. So things that here at TELUS, in terms of what we do, we're looking in terms of actually we started in terms of incorporating supplier diversity in our sourcing process, which means that in every RFX opportunity that we run, we include a percentage allocated in our evaluation criteria that are that we associate with sustainability and supplier diversity. So it is a clear objective for us, and I think it provides us with competitive advantage. I mean, there's many studies around the impact of what supplier diversity or sustainability can bring to your bottom line, right? We've seen that over again. It supports our corporate brand in terms of our image, where we give where we live type of strategy, and it really looks at increasing competition and improves saving opportunities. So investing, whether in small companies or large companies, really provides us with future competitive advantage. So it's on top of our mind, and we're really embedding it in the sourcing process. Is the way that we're going about it.
And kind of speak a little bit on that. And as far as getting it into the sourcing process, organizationally, was that something that came naturally internally, or were there different kinds of discussions that had to be that needed to come into effect across different organizations or departments within your company?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think getting your key stakeholders buy-in is a bit of challenge. But I think as you develop your supplier diversity program or sustainability program, if you do not include the key stakeholders or the business unit, you don't have buy-ins, then you can have the best program, there, but it's not going to be successful, right, unless you have that, that buy-in from your stakeholders. So we've, involved, right, our key stakeholder in the development of the programs, right on. Thales has very strong, corporate, sustainability and D&I, measures, that we track and, publicize, and so forth. So then, aligning those, our diversity program or sustainability program with, our corporate objectives, and then linking it to our corporate objectives, and then, selling it that way to, to the business. But I would say, it's not easy, right? Because, they want to move fast. They want to go forward, with their supplier, and they're like, well, you should look at that supplier instead, right? But linking it and enforcing it, I think, at the sourcing process by ensuring that, that we, add diverse suppliers, in our RFX, I think that helped us in terms of, increasing our diverse spend. I think we were at, 5%. So Canada, I think, we don't have, laws right around, supplier diversity. And, looking at, increasing it to, 9%, right, this year. I think that has been helpful.
No, great. Thank you. And Javette, do you have any lessons learned as far as getting stakeholders involved to build up support for these kind of programs?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. Many of the organizations I mentioned earlier, we've been involved with them for a very long time. And so I think it's very helpful when, establishing and maintaining a supplier diversity program is certainly working with those membership networks that certify diverse firms, right? That's first and foremost. And then I think certainly incorporating supplier diversity as an integrated part of our supply chain and sustainability processes and sourcing, absolutely wonderful. And I think beyond that, you're taking a look at the metrics that you have, the opportunities, and again, back to the capacity building that Sherry mentioned. So I want to say that, going back to the question, even looking at this past year, what the past year has done is to bring supplier diversity more to the forefront and allowed us all to ensure that it's not just sourcing and procurement that's accountable for supplier diversity, but it is making sure lines of business working across the corporation with respect to sustainable finance team, working with our global public affairs team to take a look at, okay, what's one step further that we can go beyond general procurement and supply chain, looking at supplier diversity. And when you have a goal of trying to get to $1 billion in spend in 2 years, it can't all just be in the supply chain. So now you have to think about what else do you do? And so I think for me, it's the overall integration within the firm, engaging with other stakeholders across the firm, taking a look at what you're doing, whether it's capacity building globally, microfinancing, sustainable finance, workshops. All of those go into the supplier diversity aspect, the capacity building aspect, and then the longevity of a supplier diversity program that can be sustainable because you have the appropriate metrics in there. So I think that really, for us has been kind of a key best practice. And then just one more thing I'll share, that certainly some of the actions that we started to take based on our Action for Racial Equity was just to do more intentional awareness sessions within the firm. So utilizing and working with my corporate stakeholders, certainly, but also my peers from other firms, sharing best practices that are happening in other places with peers for me, but who are suppliers and or customers of Citi, has also allowed for that additional, kind of ecosystem building in terms of conversions of what supplier diversity can be in a full network, and really helps us all at the end of the day align with the sustainable development goals as well in terms of partnership and taking supplier diversity and sustainability to the next level.
Yeah, I want to pull on that thread because the SDGs, when you think about the roadmap for a sustainable supply chain that leaves no one behind, purpose is your North Star, the SDGs are really your roadmap. And I think what's happened is a lot of the inequities that we've designed into our systems have come to light. They've come to roost in the past 24 months. And fundamentally, businesses cannot succeed in societies that are failing. So when you look at supplier diversity through the lens of sustainability, for example, protecting that social license to operate, this isn't about lowest cost. This is about long-term shared value creation that is just as much about transforming products and economies as it is transforming the lives of people. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you have to put equity at the center of everything you do. Gender equity, racial equity, economic equity, because what happens in a supply chain is if people can't meet things like basic needs, you inherently design risk in your supply chain, period. And we can go into human risks and, what the impact of a fair living wage in an ecosystem means for supply chains, especially supplier diversity initiatives. So I also want to double click on the concept of, traditionally we've looked at people, planet, profit, and the triple bottom line. And what's happening is a sea change toward a quadruple bottom line, which includes impact, progress, purpose. That's that fourth element of what is the impact through the lens of supplier diversity. If I have $1 spend and I have to choose between a diverse supplier or business as usual, what economic impact am I creating with that dollar? It could be $2.50. Why? Because diverse suppliers, they spend money differently. Education, healthcare, economic empowerment, they spend in their communities, the communities where we operate. So I think all of this, when you think about it through the lens of shared value creation, long-term value creation, it's a much different conversation. And you have to bring folks along with you. They have to be willing and able. And I always start with willing because that's the first step in any long transformational journey.
And if I could, I think that's a great point there. You have to be willing, but that includes, as we're talking about supplier diversity and sustainability, making sure that diverse suppliers, and especially the larger ones who are those $1 billion suppliers or even 50 million, those who actually themselves have diversity inclusion programs in place, those who are also already focused on sustainability and have an awareness of the SDGs, ensuring that they too are actually talking about those things that are important to us and then therefore them, that drive change, and them talking about the impact that they are able to make into their communities, based on, doing business with some of the larger corporations, but also what they in turn are doing to, kind of like make that transformation themselves in their different communities. And I think, again, it is really clear about the economic impact across the board. It does impact, which allows it to be supplier diversity, not just US centric, but a global process truly aligned with sustainable development goals. And then the sustainability aspect as certainly be a bigger part of the ESG, but the whole, story and narrative focused on two collective pillars, economic impact and then progress across the board.
Those are good points. And I especially like the notion that all three of you are pulling together as far as focusing on what your company is doing, but just sort of the network effects as well that happen by bringing in the different suppliers and their impact across the community, and really looking at it across your supply chains as that ecosystem, and helping support and promote those that are also pursuing their own supplier diversity programs helps lift up everyone. And so I think those are really those are great points as far as tips on how to get stakeholders involved, because I think in many ways I'm sure there's still some folks that are sitting out thinking that's still just a nice to have versus becoming an economic imperative and business imperative. And so, I think folks in the audience are probably thinking about how they can start engaging their stakeholders as well. Then when talking about, looking at what suppliers are doing and what their own approach to diversity, equity, inclusion, and sustainability, it seems that to actually start doing some of those assessments, and to Sherry's point, how do they turn $1, and how does that have an economic impact? Is it $2? Is it $5? Do they have a negative economic impact? It seems like it would require a fair amount of data and technology to help out along those lines. And so perhaps Sherry, maybe you can talk a little bit about one, let's start with the data challenge in this area first.
It's a challenge. It's a challenge. What I'll share first is there is a methodology in place called value balancing. So when you start to get, into the nitty gritty, the math, and some of the science of impact methodology and how you would measure that, there is a framework, another framework. No, but it works. It works. So that's one of the things that I help, my team helps folks do. So when you start to talk about ingesting risk and data to help, a lot of the ESG related metrics, a lot of them are tied to risk. What often happens is, especially upstream in sustainable sourcing and procurement, it's self-certifying. A lot of these supplier assessments you have a gap between what folks say they do, how they walk the talk, versus what's happening on the ground. What's the ground truth? So specifically, you know, when you get into certain commodities like palm oil, for example, you can use a convergence of tech to get closer to first party signals and ground truth, like using satellite imagery, tri-sector partnerships or partnerships with NGOs, having boots on the ground. There's edge sensing that you can use with robotics. There's lots of really cool technology. But I think fundamentally, how you eliminate it, we look at root cause corrective action, treat folks the right way, okay? It's carrot and stick. You have to incentivize the right behaviors, but you also need policies and accountability in place for defectors. I mean, and I think that we've boiled the ocean a bit in trying to figure out, you know, how do we create a transparent and trusted supply chain through the lens of sustainability? Well, we've designed a lot of this stuff in because we've iterated to lowest cost historically. And when we do that, we know what happens. I mean, look in the world we share, the massive inequities that we've created. So I think that technology can help. I don't think that it's a silver bullet, though. The world is not run on laptops. Supply chains certainly aren't either. And when you think about the physicality and the digital divide that happens, it's very real. So it's an augmented approach. You know, it takes everyone moving together, grounded in SDG 17, partnerships at scale, partnerships for impact. And it does take a massive, you know, movement of not only folks in industry and leveraging some of the consortia and the you know, massive collaborations at scale that are already happening, but policy and consumers demanding transparency and trading partners demanding these things as well. And we'll get there, but this is a heavy lift. And I don't think that technology alone can solve it.
Yeah,
sorry, IBM. But I love what I do, and I try and get there, and I try and help folks get there. But this is not just technology.
Right. Yeah, no, and absolutely. You know, it's a socio-technical system. That's always what I try and push out. The technology is there to augment, but you can't take the human out of the loop. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, it's for the entire social systems that are out there. And if you ignore that, we've seen how technology can go astray when you ignore sort of the human impact and how humans interact with technology. How about you, Javette or Miriam? Do you have any insights or lessons learned from technology or data that, you know, best practices that you've seen or challenges?
I won't say technologies just yet. I'll definitely say data, because the challenge for me is data, right? Even when getting data in, you got to do something with the data. And so, you know, as much as we want to get data and manage it and review it and make sure we're doing the right things, then there's that business aspect of being audited based on the data that you're also getting as well. And so, for instance, right now, when it comes to data, technologically, this is probably the next step for us, but we have what's called the Corporate Responsibility Questionnaire. And so that questionnaire is utilized to get an understanding or to assess our suppliers. What is it that you're doing as it relates to environmental, social governance? And so there are very specific questions based on environmental sustainability, workplace safety, labor, modern slavery, just to get an understanding and what are our suppliers doing? And then a few questions on supplier diversity and governance. How do you govern yourself? If you say, as you know, Sherry indicated earlier, if you say you're walking the walk, then how is it that you're actually walking the walk? Let's see what you're doing here. What are your policies and practices that you have in place? So, you know, but the thing though about that is that how do you also manage that data? Do you continue to manage it internally, or do you begin to work with people who can not only help you monitor that data, but to make sure that there's a certain level of accuracy in terms of what people are also reporting to you? But I think the good news is that it's become important enough in terms of this overflow of discussion about, one, the ESGs, but then even trying to get to the SDG, kind of a kumbaya, a real gathering of, conclusion and success by 2030. The only way we can do that is to work together, to stay focused on those partnership goals, to look at for us, we've been focused particularly in supplier diversity and sustainability on gender equality and decent work and growth and reduction of inequalities. I think that goes back to the whole point of, when you're talking about all of this, it's not just about dollars and cents. It is about people and it's about impact. And there's a certain conversation that has to go with this. Data, yes. but impact, back to that word again, what's the impact we're making? How are we utilizing the data? And then ultimately, how can technology be a plus for us in terms of the tracking, the maintaining, and then sustaining that which we say we're trying to leverage and make better?
I do want to pull on one thread that you just mentioned around, and it made me think about how do you get ahead of grievances or violations specifically tied to child and forced labor. So using data, you can actually do some really cool things around sentiment analysis, scraping, like a lot of the assessments. People typically don't admit, oh yeah, we have forced labor in our supply chain. So you can use AI and, crawl CSR reports, crawl chat boards, social media feeds to get a sense, a predictive sense of whether or not someone would potentially have some of these human risks or environmental risk in their supply chain. But again, it's very new technology. I think it's actually effective just to get that heavy lift. You think you have 100,000 suppliers. How could you possibly go through all of them? How could you possibly know? It's really good in focusing and giving you more of a clearer scope on who should you double check, what your next step would be. And I think that you can use technology in that way just to get ahead of things before they happen, because once you already have a grievance or a violation, it's almost too late. The impact to brand risk, brand integrity, it's already out there, and it just takes one post. It takes one post. So that's a great point, Javette.
Yeah, no, it's good. No, thank you. Mir, do you want to?
Yeah, I think, everything that they've said totally, agree. But the way, we look at it is really, in terms of supplier, qualification, but also contractually, right? Like every single, contract that we have, addresses, right, all these issues. And what we, when we reach out to our suppliers annually, they have to attest that, that they're not, that they certify that they're following, right, our supplier code of conduct, all the things that Javette and Sherry, mentioned. The challenge, in terms of, measuring that data, and then how do you, what do you do with that data, and, and so forth. I think that is, a big challenge. This is where I think technology can really help us as it evolves. But yeah, it starts, that's one of the things that we're doing. Is on the contractual side, and using third parties to do evaluations in the background and at the station yearly to ensure that we're qualifying the right supplier, and we're measuring the right data.
Yeah, no, that's great. And and I think that's sort of it's a great note to end on. And there's so much more that we could discuss throughout all this. I think this could be we'd easily fill a full day of conversations on this, but there are a lot of opportunities ahead. I think it's really interesting to think about how technology and data can help be part of the solution, together with all these other components that we talked about, as far as working with your suppliers, thinking about them as networks, the collaboration that's going to be needed. Because at the end of the day, I think back to Sherry's point, as far as businesses aren't going to succeed if we're not taking into account the fact that some of these societies and the impact that we're having on those, and helping build up and help businesses build up as well, and help the communities build up. So I want to thank Sherry, Javette, and Miriam for a really fascinating conversation, and look forward to continuing it in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.